What unfolds when one of Hollywood's most recognizable entertainers arrives for what is supposed to be a standard television appearance, and instead finds himself facing open hostility from a host intent on dismantling his career? The segment quickly turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments the audience had seen in a long time. Viewers watching could sense that something was off even before a single sharp word was spoken. The studio carried a strange tension that morning, as if everyone present knew the conversation was heading somewhere volatile. Adam Sandler had taken a seat to discuss his latest film, a dramatic project that stood apart from the broad comedies that made him famous. Critics had praised his performance, noting the restraint and emotional weight he brought to the role. He appeared relaxed at first, smiling easily and settling into the familiar rhythm of daytime television. This was meant to be a straightforward promotional stop, nothing more. Across the table sat Behar, whose tone immediately set the exchange on an unexpected course. From her first comment, there was an unmistakable sharpness that caused heads to turn. Rather than easing into discussion of the film, she framed his career shift as an admission of failure, suggesting his comedic work no longer held value. The remark landed heavily, drawing an audible reaction from the room. For a brief instant, Sandler's expression shifted, though he quickly regained his composure. He spoke calmly, explaining that exploring drama was not a sudden move but something he had done periodically for years. Acting, he said, allowed him to explore different forms of storytelling, and he enjoyed moving between tones and genres. Before he could fully finish his thought, the interruption came. Behar leaned forward, her words more pointed now, listing critical responses to his recent comedies and dismissing their success outright. She framed his new project as an attempt to rescue a damaged reputation rather than an artistic choice. The other panelists grew visibly uneasy. Whoopi Goldberg cast a cautious glance in Behar's direction, silently signaling concern, but the momentum did not slow. Sandler responded with careful restraint, noting that audience connection mattered more to him than unanimous critical approval. His films, he said, resonated with fans, and that relationship had sustained his career for decades. Not every project needed to appeal to every viewer. The reply was measured, but the tightening of his jaw suggested the comments were beginning to take a toll. Behar reacted with open mockery, reducing his audience to immature stereotypes and dismissing his work as lacking intelligence. A low murmur spread through the studio as the atmosphere shifted from playful debate to something far more aggressive. This was no longer light teasing. It felt deliberate, personal, and unrelenting. Sandler's tone grew firmer as he addressed the hostility directly. He reminded her that he had come to discuss a film centered on family and loss, themes that carried genuine emotional weight. He expressed surprise at the confrontational approach, emphasizing that a thoughtful discussion would have been more appropriate. The response did little to soften the exchange. Behar doubled down, claiming his dramatic performances were merely diluted versions of his comedic persona. According to her, there was nothing transformative in his work, nothing that justified calling him a serious actor. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Off-camera, his publicist appeared ready to intervene, but Sandler subtly signaled that he wanted to continue. When he spoke again, there was steel beneath his calm delivery. He reflected on his 3 decades in the industry, the millions of people who had found joy in his films, and the talented collaborators he had worked alongside. He stated clearly that he would not accept disrespect toward his career or the audiences who supported him. His words carried conviction, and for a moment, the room fell quiet. Behar responded with a sharp laugh, dismissing his remarks as self-indulgent. She framed her criticism as a necessary call-out of mediocrity, accusing him of profiting from simplistic humor while more deserving artists struggled for recognition. The implication stung, and Sandler's reaction showed it. He pushed back, defending comedy as a legitimate and meaningful art form. Entertainment, he argued, held real value. His films provided jobs, supported families, and offered people a chance to escape their problems even briefly. Creating laughter, he said, was not something to be trivialized. The sincerity in his voice contrasted starkly with the earlier levity. Attempts by the other hosts to redirect the conversation fell flat. Behar continued, deriding his work as disposable and accusing him of avoiding real creative risk. By now, Sandler's patience was clearly wearing thin. His hands clenched the chair arms as his voice grew more intense. He spoke about the nature of risk in performance, describing the vulnerability that came with stepping in front of a camera and inviting judgment. Failure was always a possibility, and facing that fear repeatedly was its own kind of courage. He then addressed the situation directly, calling out the ambush-like tone of the interview and the lack of professionalism he felt he was experiencing. The studio went silent, save for the quiet hum of cameras still recording. Behar's expression hardened, her demeanor turning cold and calculating. She framed herself as someone unafraid to speak bluntly about an industry figure she believed had never evolved beyond juvenile appeal. In that moment, The exchange crossed an invisible line, transforming from tense disagreement into a defining confrontation that left everyone watching stunned by how far it had gone. Adam Sandler leaned forward in his seat, his posture suddenly rigid, his gaze fixed squarely on Joy Behar. When he spoke, his tone was low and restrained, but the intensity beneath it was impossible to miss. The studio seemed to freeze as his words cut through the air with controlled anger. He explained that he had done everything possible to remain courteous and professional, despite the relentless attacks. It was now clear to him that she had arrived with a preconceived mission, and he was finished pretending otherwise. He challenged her openly, questioning what she believed she had truly given to audiences over the years, and what genuine joy she had added to people's lives. Joy's expression changed instantly, color flooding her face as she snapped back with indignation. She rattled off her resume, reminding everyone that she had spent decades as a broadcaster, collected awards, broken major stories, and confronted powerful political figures. Her voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling the conversation. Sandler did not back down. His voice grew stronger as he pointed out that, despite all of that, she was now using her influence to tear down someone whose entire career had been centered on making people laugh. He accused her of choosing the safest possible position, sitting behind a desk and criticizing those who took creative risks in front of the world. The other panelists looked stunned, frozen in their seats as the exchange spiraled further out of control. One of the hosts attempted to interrupt, suggesting a break and a return to discussing the film, but Sandler immediately shut that down. He insisted on continuing, stating that since the confrontation had been initiated, it deserved to be finished. He explained that the real challenge was not acting or career shifts, but maintaining self-respect while being openly attacked by someone who was supposed to be conducting an interview, not a character assassination. Joy slammed her palm against the table, the sharp sound echoing through the studio. She mocked his defense, reducing his career to repeatedly making the same movies with friends while earning massive paychecks. She dismissed it outright as something fraudulent rather than artistic. A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the moment crossed from tense into shocking. Sandler stood up abruptly, rising above the desk, his disbelief evident in every word. He rejected her accusation outright, stating that he had never promised anything beyond entertainment. People bought tickets to his movies because they wanted laughter, escape, and a brief sense of happiness, and that was exactly what they received. He then turned the criticism back toward the show itself, questioning whether viewers tuned in expecting to watch guests be publicly ambushed and humiliated rather than engaged in meaningful discussion. Joy shot to her feet as well, matching his intensity without hesitation. She argued that audiences watched for honesty and confrontation, not gentle conversations designed to protect celebrities from discomfort. According to her, difficult questions were necessary, especially for people she believed had been treated as untouchable for too long. Sandler let out a short laugh, completely devoid of humor, and dismissed her justification. He stated plainly that what was happening had nothing to do with journalism or accountability. It was a deliberate attack, and anyone watching could see it clearly. The chaos in the studio became visible. Camera operators hesitated, unsure where to focus. The remaining host sat motionless, caught between stepping in and allowing the confrontation to unfold. Finally, Whoopi Goldberg spoke up, urging both of them to sit down and lower their voices, warning that the situation was spiraling out of control. Joy ignored the plea, pressing forward with renewed force. She argued that what was truly unacceptable was pretending mediocrity deserved applause simply because it generated profit. She accused the industry of elevating people who, in her view, added nothing of real substance to culture. Sandler's eyes burned as he listened. When he responded, his voice carried both anger and raw emotion. He described receiving a letter from a mother whose autistic son struggled to find joy in a world that often treated him cruelly. According to her, Sandler's movies were the one thing that consistently made her son laugh, the one source of uncomplicated happiness in his life. Sandler said that moment, that connection, meant more to him than every sarcastic remark ever delivered at that table. The room was utterly silent as his words landed. Joy reacted with open contempt, dismissing the story as manipulative sentimentality. She argued that one emotional anecdote could not excuse what she viewed as decades of crude, low-quality work. Sandler's voice broke slightly as he fired back, asking what was truly crude about using a platform to humiliate someone out of bitterness. He accused her of abusing her position, choosing cruelty over compassion, and tearing people down instead of lifting them up. The audience remained frozen, witnessing the unraveling in real time. Joy's expression twisted with fury, mixed with something that resembled satisfaction at having pushed him this far. She insisted she was simply holding him accountable for what she saw as harmful cultural influence, claiming someone needed to enforce standards. Sandler threw up his hands in disbelief, stating that her version of standards was nothing more than cruelty disguised as honesty. He accused her of thriving on discomfort and outrage, and declared that this approach was exactly what was wrong with modern media. The tension became unbearable. Off-camera staff gestured frantically, desperate to regain control, but the confrontation had completely escaped them. Joy leaned forward, lowering her voice into a sharp whisper, delivering one final insult about a grown man earning millions by behaving like a child. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, as the studio remained locked in stunned silence. The words about dignity were the breaking point. In that instant, Adam Sandler lost the careful control he had been clinging to, and what followed would circulate endlessly online in the days ahead. His face flushed a deep red, and when he spoke, his voice trembled with a level of anger no one in the studio had ever seen from him. He repeated the word with disbelief, his voice booming across the set. He rejected the idea that he needed a lecture on dignity from someone who, in his view, spent her days trading in gossip and negativity, tearing down anyone who dared to find success or happiness. He framed that behavior as her true legacy, not the moral authority she claimed. Joy Behar tried to cut in, but Sandler surged forward verbally, years of bottled frustration finally spilling out. He told her flatly that she had spoken long enough and that now it was his turn. His finger shook as he pointed in her direction, emotion pouring through every word. He spoke about courage, not as performance bravado, but as a daily choice to spread joy instead of bitterness, to lift people up rather than reduce them to targets, to create something meaningful instead of criticizing from a safe distance. The rest of the panel sat frozen. Sonny Hostin looked as though tears were close to the surface. Sarah Haynes stared ahead in stunned silence, her mouth slightly open. Whoopi Goldberg waved urgently toward the producers off camera, but the control room appeared just as stunned as everyone else watching the confrontation unfold. Sandler continued, his voice cracking as emotion overtook anger. He spoke about the misconception that comedy was easy. He described the vulnerability of standing before millions, attempting to add a bit of lightness to lives weighed down by stress and disappointment. Every joke, he said, was a gamble. Every film was an invitation to be judged by critics who had never taken that kind of risk, never tried to make strangers smile, never exposed their hearts to public scrutiny. For the first time, Behar appeared genuinely shaken. Her confidence wavered as she tried to downplay the moment, suggesting that his reaction was excessive. Sandler answered with a bitter laugh, dismissing that idea entirely. He pointed out that she had spent a significant portion of the segment dismantling his career on live television, and he refused to accept that his response was the problem. He warned that what followed would make clear what real overreaction looked like. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, his hands visibly unsteady as he scrolled through messages. His voice steadied as he began reading words sent by people far removed from studio lights and industry politics. He shared a message from a woman in Ohio who said his movies had helped her survive the emotional wreckage of a divorce, giving her moments of laughter when she believed she would never smile again. Behar attempted to interrupt, but Sandler cut her off, insisting that this mattered. He read another message, this one from a man in Texas who watched his films with an elderly father suffering from dementia. According to the message, those movies were the last thing that could still make the old man laugh. A low murmur swept through the audience. Some viewers were openly crying. Cameras captured people wiping their eyes, completely absorbed by the raw emotion of the moment. Sandler pressed on, his voice growing stronger with each example. He read a note from a single mother in Michigan juggling 2 jobs, who said his films were how she decompressed after exhausting 14-hour days. She wrote that they reminded her it was acceptable to be silly sometimes, that laughter was not immature but necessary. By now, Behar's face had gone pale. This was not a direction she had anticipated, nor one she seemed prepared to counter. Sandler gestured toward the audience and beyond the studio walls. He spoke about the disconnect between media commentary and real life, describing people who struggled daily with pain, exhaustion, and uncertainty. He accused her of sitting comfortably, well paid to explain why people should feel embarrassed for enjoying simple pleasures. He declared that if his so-called lowbrow films gave people reasons to smile, then he stood proudly behind every one of them. The emotion in his voice was unmistakable. This was not a performance or a crafted monologue. It was a man defending the purpose that had guided his entire career. Behar eventually responded again, but her voice was quieter, stripped of its earlier sharpness. She clarified that she was not condemning enjoyment itself, only arguing that artists carried a responsibility to challenge themselves and create work with depth. Sandler stepped closer to the desk, his eyes blazing with intensity. He repeated the word substance and redefined it on his own terms. Substance, he said, was a child battling cancer who could forget pain for a couple of hours while watching one of his movies. Substance was families sitting together in a theater, sharing laughter instead of staring at separate screens. Substance was choosing positivity over constant cynicism. He paused briefly, collecting himself, then continued with unwavering strength. He stated that what truly lacked substance was the interview itself, the hostility, the need to tear down someone who had never caused her harm. The studio fell into complete silence, broken only by the steady whir of cameras and the sound of someone in the audience quietly sobbing. Even the crew appeared transfixed, unable to look away. Behar made one final attempt to regain control, suggesting that the exchange had simply begun on the wrong note. Sandler reacted with open disbelief, his voice heavy with exhaustion and disbelief as the confrontation hung unresolved in the air. Adam Sandler made it clear that there had been no misunderstanding from the start. He said she hadn't stumbled into the exchange by accident or taken a wrong turn along the way. In his view, Joy Behar had arrived fully prepared, intent on tearing him down for reasons he doubted he would ever truly understand. Yet despite the effort and the hostility, he told her plainly that she hadn't succeeded. What mattered most to him, he explained, was not the noise in the studio but the certainty he carried within himself. He knew who he was, what he had built over decades, and what he had given to the world. That knowledge, he said, was something no hostile interview could take away. He spoke about the simple peace of going home at the end of the day with a clear conscience, knowing that somewhere people were smiling or laughing because of something he had created. That sense of fulfillment outweighed any criticism thrown his way. Turning away from the desk, he looked directly into the camera, addressing viewers beyond the studio walls. His tone softened as he spoke to anyone who had ever been made to feel embarrassed for finding joy in small, uncomplicated things. He urged them not to let anyone convince them that their happiness was trivial or undeserved. Life, he said, was already difficult enough without others trying to strip away the few moments of light that made it bearable. The room remained silent as his words settled. He then turned back toward Behar, his voice calm but unyielding. He told her that he genuinely hoped she would someday find whatever it was she was searching for, because what had just unfolded was not it. Hurting others, diminishing their work, and feeding on negativity could never fill whatever emptiness drove such behavior. The statement wasn't shouted or dramatic. It was delivered with a quiet finality that carried more weight than anger ever could. With that, Sandler stepped away from the table and walked off the set. No one tried to stop him. The studio seemed frozen, as if everyone present needed a moment to process what had just happened. The confrontation had drained the room of energy, leaving behind only shock and disbelief. Cameras followed his exit briefly before cutting back to Behar, whose expression had changed noticeably. For a fleeting moment, there was something on her face that resembled regret, or at least the realization that the situation had spiraled far beyond her control. Seconds later, the broadcast cut to commercial. In the days and weeks that followed, the interview became a subject of intense discussion. Clips circulated endlessly online, dissected from every angle by commentators and viewers alike. Some focused on the breakdown of professionalism, others on the raw emotion that had finally surfaced. For many, stood as a stark illustration of what happens when provocation is mistaken for insight and cruelty is defended as honesty. The exchange also served as a reminder that public figures, no matter how successful or seemingly unshakable, are still human beings. Behind the fame and the headlines are real emotions, real limits, and real breaking points. Sandler's reaction resonated with many because it reflected a universal experience, the moment when restraint gives way after being pushed too far. His defense was not just of his career, but of the idea that bringing joy to others has value, even if it doesn't fit neatly into someone else's definition of art or substance. For some viewers, the confrontation highlighted a broader cultural issue. There is a growing tendency to dismiss happiness that isn't intellectually complex or socially approved, as though joy must justify itself to be legitimate. Sandler's words challenged that notion directly. He reframed laughter not as an escape from reality, but as a necessary tool for surviving it. In doing so, he struck a chord with audiences who saw their own experiences reflected in his defense. The moment also exposed the fine line between tough commentary and personal attack. While criticism has its place, the interview demonstrated how easily it can turn into something corrosive when empathy is abandoned. The fallout became a cautionary tale for both interviewers and guests, showing how quickly a conversation can unravel when respect disappears. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, the impact of that exchange lingered. It was replayed not just as viral content, but as an example of the power of sincerity in the face of cynicism. Sandler's exit was not triumphant in a conventional sense, quiet, resolute, and grounded in self-awareness. That restraint, even in the midst of anger, is what many people found most compelling. Ultimately, the moment stood as a reminder that passion, when rooted in genuine belief, can be more powerful than cruelty masked as critique. It showed that even those known for kindness and humor have limits, and that when those limits are crossed, standing up for oneself can be an act of dignity rather than aggression.